Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We shall now commence the first panel discussion of the forum titled Advancing Business and Trade Connectivity. This session is moderated by Dr. Puspa Sharma, Visiting Senior Research Fellow at ISAS. Joining Dr. Sharma on panel are Mr. G Jayakrishnan, Executive Director, Global Markets, South Asia, Middle East, Africa, Enterprise Singapore, Mr. Vivek Kathpalia, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, Mr. Neil Parekh, Chairman, Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Partner and Head, Asia, Australia and New Zealand Tikehau Capital, and Nominated Member of Parliament, Singapore, Mr. Rahul Shah, Resident Director, ASEAN, Tata Sons Pvt Ltd, and Mr. Amit Sinha, Managing Director and Group Head, Telecom, Media and Technology, Western MNC, Digital Economy and Offshore India Businesses, Institutional Banking Group, DBS Bank. I shall now hand over the session to Dr. Sharma to begin this.
Thank you, Divya. Welcome everyone to the first panel discussion of the day. I don't think I need to say too much to put things into context because the inaugural session, we heard from the chairman, from the deputy PM as well about the advancing India-Singapore economic relationship over the past 2 decades, especially after the signing of SICA. Bilateral trade has gone up impressively. Similarly, investment from Singapore to India, from India to Singapore has also gone up significantly. Although last year, I think in terms of overall FDI, India received there's quite a drop in FDI into India overall, and also from Singapore, but still Singapore perhaps was the largest investor in India. And things are moving quite well, it seems. And also we have seen several high-level visits in the past several years, quite frequent ones, which also speak of the importance of India-Singapore bilateral economic relationship going forward. New areas are being discussed upon. So in this session particularly, the title of which is Advancing Business and Trade Connectivity, we are going to discuss about what are the prospects of the future prospects of the relationship between India and Singapore, the economic and trade relationship between the two countries, but also what are the challenges ahead. So to discuss this, as you can see, we have very eminent speakers here on the panel. They're highly experienced, having very deep insights into the issues of the year. So I won't take much time. I would go into inviting them to put up their views, and perhaps we will go in the order of the program itself. So first, let me invite Mr. Jayakrishnan, asking him to reflect something on where the India-Singapore economic relationship stands today in terms of two-way direct investment and trade flows. What are the major sectors that are growing? Which are the states in India, particularly where this activity has been taking place? So if you could reflect on these, perhaps 5 to 6 minutes in the beginning, then we can perhaps take a second round later.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to ISAS for the very kind invitation. I think it's very, very accurate to say that the economic relationship between Singapore is one which is very deep and enduring. And in what we've seen in the past few years, and certainly reflected in what's happening in the last 2 weeks and today, the last couple of days, the high-level visits, the ISMR, I think we are at a cusp of another uptick in the business and economic relationships between the two countries. You're absolutely right. Those figures, we are the largest foreign investor. Singapore is the largest foreign investor. I think the stock now is about $90 billion. That's not a small amount by any means. I think what's perhaps most compelling is that where Singapore has been, and Singapore firms and the investments and the trade, where they've been directed to, are very aligned to where India's needs are as well. So if you just pick up a couple of sectors, and it's very, very, very telling. in the area of whole green transition and renewables, India, one of the biggest opportunities, but also challenges for a fast industrializing economy is really power. Right? Where are they going to get power, and how can they get clean power? So renewables is really going to be a big sector of opportunity and challenge. And Singapore is already a significant investor player there. India's natural endowments in solar and wind, we're just talking onshore wind, but offshore wind is totally unexploited at this point. We probably have in the region of $5 to $6 billion invested in that sector. And today, a lot of that investment is directed to addressing India's domestic energy requirements. But in the years to come, there is the very, very exciting export opportunity as well. It's been announced Sembcorp has invested or is planning to invest in the region of $3 to $4 billion to export green ammonia and hydrogen, not just to Singapore, but really into the high growth, high demand markets of Korea and Japan. So renewables is just one example. We've heard a lot about manufacturing and advanced manufacturing and semiconductors. There's some skeptics who wonder whether or not this is really the direction to go. But I think India has not shied away from the fact that manufacturing has been an issue. India's manufacturing share of India's GDPs has been hovering for some time at about 16, 17%. And if you compare this with other economies the same size, China is in the 30s. So India has been lagging in its manufacturing output. Question is, where then next for manufacturing? We think that, again, there's some great complementarity. Singapore has been a manufacturing powerhouse for a long time. And just using semiconductors as an example, very ambitious plans Indians have. They've put money behind it. The first tranche of $10 billion from the government has been allocated to the first few investment proposals by Tata, CG Power, and so on. But there is a very clear gap in where and what India needs to achieve that ambition, and that is in its supplier ecosystem, for example, for the semiconductors. There are many suppliers that need to be there to support these large investments. And I think there again, there's great complementarity. Singapore today produces about 20% of world chips. And that's great. And there's a great ecosystem here that's developed over the last 30, 40 years. So the idea is, can we bring our ecosystem of suppliers, sub-suppliers, materials into India to support that very ambition that they have? I'm just picking up a couple of examples here sectorally, where I think there's great complementary. There's also challenge, but I think that's what makes it exciting. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Mr. Jayakrishnan. We'll come to the challenges later in the second round. But indeed, a few of these sectoral examples that you said perhaps are the areas where the two countries are also looking into advancing this economic relationship further. Let me now come to Mr. Kathpalia, Vivek Kathpalia. You can perhaps highlight on how do you find the investment landscape when you look at the Singapore-India bilateral economic relationship, particularly if you could focus on the legal and regulatory developments that have taken place, because I think that's the area that you work on particularly.
I think the reason I'm standing here is I have a very short presentation. I'm not going to bore you. As a lawyer, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about where India has come in the perspective of foreign investment. We've heard these numbers that there's a lot of FDI coming into India, and that's a fact. If you simply look at this slide, you will see that, as has been mentioned previously today, that Singapore is the largest foreign investor in India. And that's true for the latest numbers as well. And if you look at country-wise FDI, you see the states in which FDI is going. The point of this is that Singapore is not only a jurisdiction where capital is being pooled to invest into India, which is of course one of the important reasons why this number is so high. but it's also that Singapore Inc. is investing heavily into infrastructure, real estate, all the various sectors that we'll talk about. So this is where things stand currently. And I think contrary to popular belief, India today has probably the most flexible foreign investment regime anywhere in the world. If you just look at the law itself on foreign investments, it's far more flexible than the US, most of Europe, and even most of Asia. Simply put, most sectors can attract 100% foreign investment without any approvals. There are only certain restrictions that exist in certain sensitive sectors, but those are also far more easier to invest in than many advanced economies. The other important trend that you will notice is that as the Indian economy has developed over the years, there have been phases where India Inc. invests overseas. There was a big phase maybe a decade ago where you saw large acquisitions happening. That phase has slowed down because what's happening today in India is obviously a lot of domestic consolidation, a lot of domestic M&A, a lot of domestic investment. So I think, Jay, you mentioned that, Pushpa, you mentioned that there's been a slowdown in FDI. That's obviously a reason of global trends, money going back to their own jurisdictions. But at the same time, Indian GDP has continued to grow at about 6 to 7%, driven mostly by domestic activities. The domestic activity in India is very buoyant, both from a M&A perspective, capital markets perspective. We will be reading about every day an IPO prospectus is filed with our sectoral regulator. So all of that activity is high. But when money does leave India, the first and the major port of its destination is Singapore. So it's not only FDI going into India, the same applies for ODI. And if you can see that the trends really are that obviously Singapore is the largest outbound jurisdiction. This has many facets. Some of it is to do with corporates doing global expansion, setting up their overseas hubs in Singapore, predominantly because Singapore is such an easy place to do business. It's got this great free trade network, tax efficiency, ease of doing business, etc. So today on any transactions that we work, for example, when there is a globalization discussion taking place by an Indian corporate, it's almost a no-brainer that the overseas entity that will be utilized for doing that business will be set up in Singapore. And you can see that the value of investments has just increased. Earlier, we used to focus, Indian overseas investment was mostly focused on resource-rich countries, it was all oil and gas driven. But that has shifted. Now you will see a lot of it in industries which are to do with financial services, manufacturing, skills, etc., etc. And lastly, I think one of the key aspects of the ability for any country to invest in India or do business in India is how effective is the enforcement judicial process in the country from enforcement of contracts perspective. Because you can talk about great things about investing, but what's the confidence that you have that your investments are protected, that your contracts are enforceable? So this is a work in progress. We'll talk about it a little later on what still needs to be done in judicial reform. But Singapore has played a great role here as well, because most international commercial arbitrations, which you will find in your contracts, actually have a Singapore arbitration, seated arbitration clause now. So the SIAC gets its largest share of disputes to resolve from India. I think the next is China, probably followed by the US. So because of our own slow reform process domestically, Singapore has stepped in to provide that service as well. So I think from a lawyer's perspective, this is also a no-brainer that all contracts we now have for Singapore seated arbitrations. And you can see that most of these awards are effectively enforced in India. So that's another very important trend. I'll pause there and then maybe we can discuss about some of the other aspects. Thanks.
Thank you, Vivek. Next, I would want to come to Mr. Neil Parekh. You are also the chairman of SICI, which I think celebrated centennial celebration recently. Long history, 100 years. And particularly, I think you work with the SMEs in particular as well. So what has been your experience in terms of working with the SMEs, in terms of supporting them, enabling them to venture out into India for investments? If you could reflect on that, on those bits.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. A very good morning to all. Honored to be here to be part of the inaugural Singapore-India Forum. I do not have a presentation, but I prefer to stand and speak because, as my daughter says, fat guys look thinner when they stand up and speak. The bond between our two nations has always been characterized by mutual respect and shared goals of growth and development. India is set to emerge as a global economic superpower because of its vast domestic market and economic growth potential. By 2050, India's population is projected to surpass 1.6 billion, positioning it as a major economic force, potentially matching the US in terms of total economic output. India's potential emergence as a global superpower could reshape the global geopolitical and economic landscape with significant implications for Singapore. As India's economy grows, its influence will also grow across various areas from technology and trade to defense and diplomacy. The reason I'm giving this overview is I think we in Singapore need to have a greater awareness of the new India and the potential that it brings for Singapore companies. By strengthening its relationship with India, Singapore can further solidify its position as a pivotal player in the evolving global landscape. Strong relationship between both governments has fostered continuous engagement at multiple levels between government entities and business sectors alike. This foundation has led to expanded economic collaborations and recent agreements that increase trade and investment. Now, to successfully navigate India's dynamic market, it is very essential to recognize and understand the country's unique federal governance structure. India operates with a high degree of decentralization, meaning that many key approvals and regulations covering areas like land, environment, electricity, water, and manpower are managed at the state or city council level. Approach that takes into account this decentralized framework will be vital for anyone looking to tap into India's vast potential. Recognizing this need, the Singapore Indian Chamber, SICI, has actively engaged at the state level, leading trade missions to Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat in the last few months. This regional approach enables Singaporean companies to better navigate the Indian market and leverage the opportunities offered by India's rapid digitization and economic reforms. India is Singapore's 12th largest trade partner, with a share of 2.3% in Singapore's overall trade. That percentage should be a lot higher in the years to come. Bilateral trade stood at Singapore dollars 46.57 billion, displaying a growth of 18% year on year in the last couple of years. Singapore is also the second largest investor in India, with the cumulative FDI inflow of Singapore dollars $201 billion from April 2000 to September 2023. So that's over a period of 23 years. For the financial year 23-24, total FDI inflows were 92.8 billion, and the total FDI equity inflows in the same period were 58 billion. India's impressive economic growth with 6.7% GDP growth rate offers significant opportunities for Singaporean businesses. With the global shift towards China plus one, or now increasingly China plus two strategy, many nations are turning their direction to India as a major hub for supply to ASEAN and Singapore markets. As the Make in India initiative slowly gains momentum in India, is set to become a key player in manufacturing and production of goods and services, very much in line with its ambitions to become a superpower. As Jaya mentioned, beyond the traditional sectors like technology, IT, and waste management, one untapped yet promising area is India's agriculture, fresh foods and contract farming, and processed food industry. Collaborations in these sectors could play a vital role in supporting Singapore's 30 by 30 vision for food security. By engaging with India's expanding market, Singaporean companies can not only find new avenues for growth, but also contribute to building a resilient food supply chain in the region. The Singapore Indian Chamber organized trade missions to key Indian states and provided tailored support. We also hosted the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. M.K. Stalin, in May 2023, and the Chief Minister of Gujarat, Mr. Bhupendra Patel, in December 2023. As a strategic initiative, SICKI facilitates the successful entry and growth of Singaporean businesses in India's diverse markets. There's a wide variety of businesses. Our focus is on SMEs, as most of the large cap companies have their own resources to enter India. The Chamber also plays a pivotal role in these missions, demonstrating a commitment to fostering international business relationships and opening new avenues for our members. Many other similar missions are being planned for the next few months, with many in partnership with other trade associations, as well as SBF, as well as other ethnic chambers, especially the Chinese chamber that has shown great interest in expanding missions to India. Cultural diplomacy also plays a vital role in building trust and understanding, which are the bedrocks of any successful business relationship. From a SICKI standpoint, we try and enhance that by having cross-ethnic chambers, networking sessions that helps interaction with different business communities. For Singaporean businesses, understanding these trends and adopting localized strategies is very key. SICKI is committed to helping business navigate these complexities and turn challenges into growth. The strategy empowers Singaporean businesses to establish strong presence in India, leveraging local insights while taking full control of their execution of their growth plans. Now, the governments of both Singapore and India, and they're going to be speaking again this afternoon, have been proactive in facilitating bilateral trade and investment. Various initiatives such as Joint Ministerial Committee provide institutional support to businesses looking to expand into India. Public-private partnerships further amplify these efforts, driving collaboration and economic cooperation between our nations. Understanding local dynamics is crucial for any business planning to enter India. Each state in India presents unique opportunities and challenges. As many say, India is really a collection of states. For example, in our view, the states of Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Gujarat continue to be attractive destinations for investment, particularly in sectors like IT, manufacturing, and services. From a personal standpoint, I believe India will grow rapidly as a manufacturing hub, in spite of all the last mile hurdles that all of us have faced in our different business ventures. To conclude, the relationship between Singapore and India is one of mutual respect and great economic opportunity. As India continues to rise on the global stage, there is immense value in deepening our economic ties. I look forward to many questions that I'm sure you will have in the Q&A session shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parekh. I think you touched on a lot of things over there. Surely the audience might have questions, but before that, we'll go in the second round where we will also discuss the challenges in detail. Next, we have Rahul Shah from the Tata Sons. What do you see as the opportunities for long-term partnerships between Indian and Singaporean companies? And if you could reflect on how these have changed over the years, perhaps that would also give a sense of what we are discussing about the growing relationship over the past 2 decades.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My qualification for answering the second question needs to be explained. I've been in Singapore for 7 months, but before this, I've worked in the power, renewables, and engineering and construction sectors in India, which require a lot of engagement with state and center as clients. So with that explanation, let me jump into the second part of the question. I think India's growth story that we hear today and which excites us today about the compelling market that India presents, the opportunity that India presents, started a couple of decades ago. Some states that are more industrialized today woke up to the potential for foreign investment in those states. And today there are states competing with each other to attract the same investment. And that competition has led to many of what Neil called the last mile challenges, as well as many changes that the center has brought about to give more reassurance to foreign investors in the country. Let me talk about some of those. One is that when states compete for your investment, they are offering you a single window clearance. There's an online application system through which your project application gets tracked. Approvals are online in many of these states. You are given almost like your Private banking, you're given a wealth management officer. So you are assigned a senior officer by the state who will be a single point of contact for the approvals and the help you need for your project application. I think these are big steps that a lot of companies have experienced that work very well. Some of the other things that have also fallen in place very nicely with the center are the strengthening of the Indian banking systems and the bankruptcy code that has come into play, which again gives a lot of reassurance to investors that they have recourse to protect their investment. Along with the single window clearance, states also have very strong incentive packages to attract investment. And these are by way of concessions on your land prices, on certain taxes and duties that are applicable to your products. And that makes the project very, very compelling. The investment is far easier. Land acquisition has typically been a bugbear for a lot of foreign companies wanting to set up manufacturing in India. The same states today have corporations that have done the land aggregation, and they are able to offer you ready-to-use plots of land which have access to important infrastructure like highways, power connections, and water. So you don't really have to run around trying to do all those things on your own. I think these are things that have fallen in place, which anybody looking to invest in India should definitely benefit from. Many apprehensions about doing business in India arise from not having been to India. I would encourage many businesses that keep talking about India to actually visit, meet with some of these states, meet up with the center, experience for yourself, drive around, stay there for a few days, and experience for yourself what the opportunity means for you. There are some states that will be very responsive, and Neil mentioned some of those. And there are some states that have other sources of livelihood which are more dependent on agriculture. But even there are opportunities. But it needs an entrepreneurial mind. Many of Singapore's companies, the large heavyweights, Temasek, GIC, DBS, Semcorp for renewables, Singapore Airlines, Capital Land, have all been in India as a part of the first wave. I think there's a lot of rich experience there, which gives, what is it that gives these companies the confidence to do more and more in India? And why is that confidence not trickling down to other companies who are looking at doing business in India? So I think there's a lot to be said for spending time in India and understanding the opportunity. A lot of sectors have been mentioned in the ISMR and in the government press releases. And indeed, some of the speakers here have also mentioned some of the sectors that are buzzwords today. I have a few sectors that have not been spoken about, which I don't claim are absolutely gold standards, but I believe these are the next opportunities, and companies that wish to be the first ones to put a stake in the ground in those sectors would benefit very well from those investments. Back to you.
Thank you, Rahul. We'll come back again, perhaps with some questions that we might have. Now, let me turn to Amit Shah. Sorry, Amit Sinha. Sorry about that. Perhaps we're used to some of the names. Well, I mean, let's talk on the supply chain diversification issue. On supply chain diversification, there has been a lot of discussion going on that India could be one of the prospective destinations for supply chain diversification, but also there are other side of the story. But we'll talk about perhaps the challenge later on. But how do you see the supply chain diversification prospects in India coming up, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic? This has even been discussed quite strongly. So what have been your experience? How do you see the prospect of India being a destination for supply chain diversification?
So before I start, do you hear me? Okay. Quick introduction. So DBS has been in India for about 30 years. We first went in 1994 as a rep office, and then 95, we opened our first branch. And in 2021, we locally incorporated. I guess what I'm trying to drive here, based on what Rahul mentioned, we have been there for quite some years, and we have local management team So we have pretty good understanding of nuances on the ground. We across most cities in India. We have, last I checked, close to 550 branches across 300 plus cities in India. So we are pretty much operate like a local bank there. So with that backdrop, let me answer the question. Pre-COVID, maybe taking a step back, the entire supply chain, especially on the tech part or even other part, was just-in-time supply chain. A lot of companies rely on single location sourcing. For example, say for Apple, the entire iPhone assembly was done in China. I would say almost 95%. What has changed during COVID? During COVID, two things happened. One was already brewing, which was geopolitics. Second was lockdown. And that really, put in front and center that a single source just-in-time supply chain cannot sustain forever. That started opening most companies, not just in tech sector or high-tech sector, but automotive sector, other sector. The question about, should we have alternate supply chain? I hear Neil mentioning about China plus 2. The term we use internally is China plus N, because it's not just companies looking at China, but they're looking at multiple locations. It could be Vietnam, could be Thailand, could be India, could be even Mexico for US market. It's all about diversification. So in that scenario, I would say India really, we think, has a lot of potential. Just to give share some stats with you, last year, Apple exported 14 billion worth of just iPhone from India. It contributed about 15% of entire export from India. And it's just beginning in about less than 2 years' time. Currently, there are 3 companies which are doing it. It's Foxconn, Telecom, and Wistron used to do it, but they sold their plant to Tata. But assembly is, again, not a very high-end value-added work. Assembly is you bring all the components, assemble it, and then sell to the rest of the world. But the reality would be, you start with assembly, stage 2 would be components, stage 3 would be the absolute high-end chips inside it. And I would say we are seeing, at least from a DBS perspective, green shoots of a progression in that direction. I will name 2 companies which already are making significant investment. One is Micron from US. They have put a back-end assembly testing plant in Gujarat. Second, Tata Electronics. Rahul represents Tata Sons. They have great plans. In fact, they bought Wistron plant for assembly, but they also are looking into doing other things. They're looking at putting casing. They're looking at testing and assembly, which is when you make a chip, you have to assemble, test a chip. And last, looking at putting a chip manufacturing facility in India. It may not start with very high end, but the reality is today, 80% of chip demand is not very high end. The term used called advanced node, which is 5 or 3 nanometer and advanced. The reality is a large part of chip manufacturing today globally is legacy node, sometimes called 28 nanometer and above. Now, what India could learn from Singapore, Singapore did this many years back. A lot of credit goes to Economic Development Board, EDB. They have been literally at forefront, attracting a lot of large global semiconductor companies to come and invest in Singapore. So Singapore has built a very, I would say, connected ecosystem. Singapore has not gone into low value add semiconductor because, the reality is Singapore has limited amount of land. So what Singapore has attracted is a very high-end semiconductor, which means for every square foot of land, what could be the maximum dollar attribution to GDP? The things which are in Singapore today are a lot of memory, a lot of high-end foundry, wafer. So companies like Micron, UMC, TSMC has a JV here, Global Foundries, they all are in Singapore. And Singapore has built a very nice ecosystem around it. They're able to bring the component, they're able to produce chip here, and then export out. That know-how is something that they can bring it to India. An advantage of India would be India has, number one, a very large captive market. So when you produce in India, you're not looking for just exporting itself. You first sell to India. Number one, you have labor force. And to add to that, in last about 2-3 years, as a part of broader government initiative of Make in India, India government is doing two things. They're giving production link incentive and investment link incentive. When I speak to some of these companies, which I mentioned earlier, the quantum of investment link and PLI link together could be as high as 50%. So imagine if you're putting a $5 or $10 billion fab, you could get about close to $2.5 to $5 billion incentive from the government for doing that production. So beyond that, again, so that in a way addresses few things: job creation, GDP attribution. Number three, increased contribution of manufacturing in India, which today, from my other panel, is about 17%. And last but not least, semiconductor has become a very important tool today in geopolitics. So that in a way also makes India self-sufficient in doing so. So from at least from a DBS perspective, we do see that there are a lot of legs for India to stand in terms of how to play in semiconductor, or not just semicon, other supply chain diversification. Other segment where this could also add together could be automotive. India already has automotive manufacturing, but it's a lot more today assembly. There are certainly ways to see how do we expand into broad ecosystem, parts, component. Third could be precision engineering. So there are multiple areas where this particular example of semiconductor could be applied, and Singapore has a great role model. Singapore always have mastered the art of high-end manufacturing and building ecosystem around it. I'll stop here later on for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Let's give a good round of applause for the first round of the discussions here. I think we basically focused on the prospects, although some of the speakers tried to touch on the challenges as well. But definitely, when we talk about the prospects of advancing business and trade connectivity between the two countries, certainly there are many challenges as well. For example, India as a federation with different states, different states have their own rules, regulations, although there are competitions among the states, but perhaps there might also be challenges in terms of going into one and not into the other because of certain, issues over there. And it's not perhaps only the challenges of investments going from India to Singapore. Perhaps there might also be challenges about Indian companies also coming into Singapore. So in the next round, very briefly, say 3 to 4 minutes each, I would invite our speakers also to touch on the challenges that they have seen in terms of advancing this business and trade connectivity further. I will not have any specific question for anyone, but the simple question is, what are the challenges ahead that you have seen in terms of how you are working, or what you have experienced in terms of your work areas in advancing this connectivity further? Perhaps I can come in the reverse order, maybe starting with Amit yourself, starting with the challenges.
Look, I mean, the aspiration for India to grow advanced manufacturing, I talk about PLI and investment link incentive, has been around for the past 2-3 years. But the reality is you would not see a lot of large global tech companies jumping on the bandwagon to say, you know what, let's go and, the amount of investment you're seeing in other countries, including even US today, is significantly higher. So I mean, look at today what India is competing with. Just purely, I'm using a semiconductor example because that's area I know pretty well. So India is competing with US, Japan, China. They want to build their own semiconductor, Singapore, Europe. So every today geography, a large country, is trying to become self-sufficient. And India has earmarked close to $10 billion, which may look a large number, but if you compare with other countries, that number could be $50 to $100 billion. So, and again, the execution in India happens at state or district level. While you still have a single clearing window, the reality is the process is still taking a bit longer than what some other countries do. So India still has to deal with a situation where they have broad strategy. They want to attract investment, but the actual execution on the ground need to be smoothened out. The time of investment need to be fastened. And that is a little bit, all the way from land acquisition, labor laws, you still deal with union. Those are still challenges on the ground. And that you cannot solve overnight. That takes a lot more political will to solve it. And I don't think it could be solved right away. So while India is an attractive destination, all things being done right direction, my sense is, compared to other large mature economies, there are challenges on the ground. And it's not for everybody else, all of them to say, you know what, we just go and play there. So you need to know, eyes open, and then go and invest there. And those are challenges, you have to deal with it on day-to-day basis. You cannot run away from that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amit. Rahul?
When I spoke earlier, I spoke about all the good things that have happened to help the last mile and the transparency with which your project applications would move. But it has also been an experience that what matters when you deal with the government is the quality of the officer at the other end, representing the government. And in my experience, the quality of officers for contracts that you do with central government entities has been very, very good quality. These are mature people who understand contracts, who have a larger picture of things. That quality tends to deteriorate, and I'm making a general statement, it tends to deteriorate when you come to the state level. There are some outstanding officers and you'd be lucky to get one, but it does tend to fall. And the quality of contracts and the kind of officer you deal with falls further as you come to the municipal level. Unfortunately, there's a lot of opportunity at the municipal level, which tends to go untapped because of the concerns of interacting at the municipal level. To me, if India has to truly harness its potential, the quality of officers administering contracts, the quality of contracts, the bankability of contracts at a municipal level and at a state level needs to be strengthened.
Thank you. So you particularly focused on the quality of the human resource dealing with the contracts over there that perhaps needs to be strengthened further, right? Let me come to Neil about the challenges that you would see.
I don't think 4 minutes is enough. No, but more seriously, I think India's come a long way. And let me look at it, by way of labor, first and foremost. I think the labor laws have improved. A lot of work needs to be done. For any business person, being in the private equity business or for my day job, you must have some flexibility in your labor force, because you have good times and you have bad times, and then your markets change. Sometimes you need to expand in different regions. The flexibility of the labor force in India is limited largely because of the inability to lay off people at short notice. Now, while that has improved, I think that's clearly work in progress. The second is land. Now, I said earlier in my comments that I'm very optimistic about made in India, the manufacturing story taking off. I think one impediment is really land laws, because you have to build a factory and you've got to be comfortable, you're going to be owning the factory, or you have the requisite rights. And I think significant improvement has been made, especially I would say in the last 10, 15 years, but there is a long way to go on land rights being absolutely clear and making sure that there is an ability to both buy clean land as well as dispose of land in an optimal fashion. The third thing I'd like to talk about is, and I mentioned that in my earlier comments, is the regulatory overhang, as I like to call it, where many people believe that if you get it right in New Delhi, you will get it right in the States. But India, quite frankly, works at the state level. And if you don't get what's right at the state level, you'll never get your business right. Now, sometimes there's duplication of regulation. Sometimes there is lack of clarity at the state level. Sometimes when political parties are not the same at the state and the federal level, it leads to delays that are caused by, quite frankly, just politics. So these are things that one has to be aware of
while doing business in India. Things have gotten a lot better, but like I said, the opportunity set is in my view more than worth some of these constraints that we face now.
I'll echo what Neil says. I'll start with a slightly positive response and then go to some of two other areas of challenge. I think if you look at, there has been significant improvement over the last 10 years on various aspects. All the challenges that the panelists have spoken of, still a long way to go. One example is incorporating a company. If you came to me and said that we need to incorporate a company about, let's say even 5-6 years ago, let's say 10 years ago, it would take you about a month to incorporate a company in India. And there would be a lot of paperwork, etc. It had already gone online, but the processes were still not functioning that well. Today it takes, if all your paperwork is fine, it takes you about a couple of days to incorporate a company with no human interface. So simple things like company incorporation, which used to take many months to a few months to now a couple of days, has been the trajectory. And that also applies to a lesser extent in land and labor. A lot of more work to be done. Two areas where I think there's an urgent need for, and a lot of complexity still. One is tax, direct taxes. So I think India is still a very complicated tax jurisdiction. And that is something that you need to understand very well when investing in India, doing business in India. There has been some improvement there as well. A lot of it is now faceless taxation, so you don't get, you don't need to deal with the tax officers like you had to do earlier. But the back and forth on some of the direct tax context creates trouble in doing business. Recently, for example, in the last budget, there was an infamous tax called the angel tax. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It was a tax attributed if you invested money higher than the market value of the company, unlisted company, then it was a deemed capital gains. And some of these things didn't make any sense, so they rolled it back. So we have this habit of rolling things back after implementing. So I think that's one challenge I feel, both at a policy level, legislative drafting level, and then at the enforcement level. The other big challenge, and there has been work, but it's slow, it's not stalled, is judicial reform. There is a heavy backlog of cases in Indian courts. You saw my slide earlier on arbitration and why that is really the preferred way to resolve any disputes if you do fall into them. But judicial reform has been extremely slow. There are many factors. We can spend a day discussing why that's the case. So your Supreme Court and some of your high courts in the large cities are getting better equipped with use of technology, but a lot more can be done. Judicial, the number of judges that you require is still woefully short. And really nobody has an answer as to why, because this talent is there. And so I guess it's just a question of either the political or the bureaucrats upping their game in this place. The other one is on tribunals. We thought that we'll take away a lot of the caseload from courts and move them to different specialized tribunals. Many of these tribunals have not been as successful for the reasons that I mentioned about having enough trained personnel, etc. So judicial reform, I think, is a big challenge where a lot of work needs to be done. All the other areas, I feel that there has been more than a slow improvement. And hopefully in the last one also there can be improvement, and we can learn a lot from Singapore on that.
Thanks. In my role at Enterprise SG, we are right in the nexus of this trade and connectivity and trying to build the ties. So I have the benefit of seeing both ends. And so let me pick up a couple of challenges. It seems intractable sometimes. First, let's focus on the issues in market in India. I think one very, very critical challenge is around skills. Skills in the workforce in India. We all know about and we speak about and we laud the skill sets at the very top, right? And there's no shortage there. very, very bright engineers and all of this software and really, really world-class at the top end. But where a lot of the new investments, we talk about manufacturing, electronics and so on, at the technical and vocational tier, that's a huge deficit. And I think this is where India's ambitions for manufacturing have often faltered. So I think skills is an area where lots more has to be done, lots more investment, either from the corporate, from the government has to go in. Now, Singapore has been a big contributor here. We've set up skill centers across the country, but there's lots more that needs to be done. That's the first one, skills in market. The second one, which has been alluded to, and which is really logistics within the country. There's great connectivity now between Southeast Asia, Singapore, and India by sea freight, by air. I think there's something like 120 flights from Singapore to India, the 17, 20 cities. So there's no problem getting there, getting yourself or getting your product to market. But once you're there, then you face the inland logistics. And this is it's a significant drag on overall efficiencies. And that's why the export potential of India hasn't really fully been reached, right? The cost, we may have an advantage in labor costs, but the logistics costs really adds to it. And by the time you try and export it, it becomes uncompetitive. So this is a real issue. Inland logistics is improved, but again, there's still a significant gap. Now, coming to the other side, over here in Singapore, there are certainly some challenges that we see. Someone mentioned, there may be this impression that, India is a place for the large companies. And as been said, most of our domestic link companies, the large corporates have been in India for decades now and been doing well. But what about the SMEs? Is there a room? Is this market that is conducive for SMEs? We believe so. But the numbers of SMEs, Singaporean SMEs that have moved and ventured into India has been relatively less. It's growing. But I think we see there's opportunity here, maybe certainly because of the growth of India has been attractive, but also what's been going on in the other markets. Right? Many of our SMEs have ventured to China many years ago, but the slowdown is real in China. And so the SMEs are searching for growth. And I think inevitably, invariably, I think this will lead them to India as the next engine of growth. Structurally, I think we do have an issue. We need to get more of our younger people, students in the institutions here to be much more open and aware of, and curious, I should add, about what's been going on in India. There's lots been said about the new India. And maybe some of our mindsets here have been, trapped in the past. So I think we have to spend quite a lot of time trying to refresh the mindsets, impressions, awareness about where India is, the new India is, especially amongst the younger set here in Singapore, those that are entering the workforce in the schools. And what Taeyong and what we've been doing at ESG as well, with the India Ready Talent Program, working with partners like Tata, getting young people interned in institutions, in companies in India. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jay. I think with these 2 rounds of discussions, we are doing quite well with time. And I think there are quite many questions perhaps our audiences have ready to ask and discuss. Let me open the floor. But when you ask a question, could you please briefly introduce yourself and also point to the speaker who you would want to ask your question to? Yes, do you have a mic over there?
Hi, my name is Rahul. I work for NTU in the President's office. Thank you so much, NUS, for hosting this. I think there is a lot that NTU can learn from you in regards to Singapore-India ties. So we talked about a lot of high-tech things like semiconductors, but there are a lot of things that are really good to go. For example, if you talk about tourism, Singapore last year got 13 million tourists, almost double the population of Singapore. India, with a massive 1.3 billion population, we got only 10 million, right? So that's, you talked about 120 flights from Singapore to India. How has Singapore become such a tourism hub? There is a lot that India could learn from Singapore. That's one. The other area that I think Singapore and India could cooperate, if you talk about space tech, India is clearly a leader there. In fact, Singapore's first microsatellite was sent in space by ISRO. So those are the areas which I think are also areas that we could collaborate. They don't require that much of capital investment, but definitely there is a lot that can be done there. So thoughts of the panel on that?
Thank you, Rahul. We can take a few questions first, but yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Lakshmi, and I'm currently pivoting into green fintech after spending 2 decades in fintech, out of which 1 decade has been in Singapore. So another area where I feel Singapore and India could collaborate, and I think it was mentioned a few times, but in passing, is education. So I grew up and studied in India, and I was very, very trained and ready for the workforce. So I just did not have too much of navigation skills. But when I see some of my friends' children here, I don't think they're so ready for the workforce. So is there something that India can do for Singapore in terms of bridging that applied learning that India seems to have very, very naturally? So when we get out of MBA school, we can pick up the strings and we hit the ground running. But I'm not so sure if it's the same in Singapore. There's a lot of talk about mentoring, over curation, under application. So these were my thoughts. Questions to anybody who wants to take the question.
Thank you for that open question. Yes, let's take this one and then perhaps we'll.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the panel for this nice informative discussion. I'm JP Jaiswal, Chairman and Managing Director of Pickmore International. I'm Enterprise 50 winner. I'm SME here. My question is to Mr. Jayakrishnan. You rightly mentioned, the SMEs from Singapore penetration into India has been very low. And that's quite so because the ground noise from India itself is last couple of years. The SMEs are really struggling there. So with those kind of probably bureaucratic environment and other things. So what's your view on that and how you think Singapore SMEs will be encouraged to join them?
Thank you. Let's take these 3 questions first, and then we can go for a second round of Q&A. Jay, would you want to go first?
Maybe I can take a stab at certainly the last question on SMEs. You're right. It's a tough market. It's highly competitive in India. We have about 200, at least 200 to 300 SMEs operating with a presence in India that we know about, and they're across sectors. To a large degree, quite a few of them are in Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra, in the Delhi NCR region. This is where the concentration of our firms tend to be. A lot around manufacturing and related ecosystem. What we have tried to do, certainly on our part in Enterprise SG, to make the entry, so there's 2 parts, entering the market and then ongoing issues that you may face in the market. At the point of market entry, as a single SME, it's easy to get lost in the competition. So one thing we've done is really work extremely closely with very credible partners like the CII, Confederation of Indian Industry, along sectoral lines. To give you an example, we have lots of SMEs and young companies in the area of green building solutions, building technology. So it's a huge demand for it in India. And we have the companies. But going in one by one in isolation, you get eaten up. So we partner with CII. We have a green building platform where CII brings in Indian corporates, potential clients. We present and we credentialize the Singaporean SME. So this is, without this, the Singapore companies would struggle, to be honest. So partnering, leveraging a very credible partners with great reach into grade A clients is one way we can do it. Apart from that, the government here, Enterprise SG, we have a suite of assistance tools, grants, and all of that to make the entry process, the setup process a little bit easier for you. And of course, we have officers ourselves in India to help with the SMEs if they run into issues. Let me take a stab at the first one on hospitality, if tourism. I think that question is spot on. It is, it's hard to wrap your mind around it, that India gets, was it 10 million? 10 odd million tourists, and Singapore gets multiples of that. There's absolutely no reason how that should be a reality, but it is. I think it's got to do with but it's not, again, consistent across the country. Some states have done much better. Kerala has done a fantastic job promoting itself as a tourism destination. So I think it really has to do with building out certain institutions, probably at the state level, and really establishing some tight core relationships with multipliers and aggregators of tourism flows. Yeah, tour operators and the such airline partners and so on. So it can be done. It's not a new industry, right? There are many examples of how cities or countries have promoted themselves more successfully as tourism destinations. But there's certainly no shortage of tourism products and really fantastic tourism products in India. So I think it's a question of getting the act together.
Thank you.
Can I take a shot at the tourism answer?
Please.
Yeah. In my view, India struggles with building infrastructure before the demand happens. So we are typically always catching up on infrastructure, and that infrastructure has to do with airports capacity. And for flight connectivity, it has to do with roads that connect you to the cities. To handle that traffic, it has to do with quality hotels that can provide the kind of experience that a tourist would look for. And then, of course, a well-developed tourist circuit. So I think a lot of work has been done, but there is still a lot of catching up to do before we can say that we have built infrastructure ahead of demand. And to me, that is a throttling point for the potential for tourism. So there's certainly a lot to learn from Singapore, an outstanding institution like the Changi Airport, which just ensures that there's capacity ahead of demand. And then the rest of the infrastructure in terms of hotel rooms and the kind of tourism that you do, the kind of attractions that keep refreshing themselves. It's all a very conscious, deliberate effort in a very compact geography. We need to get more Indian states and cities to think that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Point on the space tech question or comment. I think as many of you may be aware, we now have a new space policy. So it's a very good question because now you have effective private participation in space in India, which also includes owning of satellites, internet through the space. So you have now, whether it's Starlink is still awaiting a license, but OneWeb has got it with Bharti. So space is a great place for business. Of course, we do the launches of satellites very well, but I think there's opportunity for Singapore companies who are in the space sector to utilize the access to the large Indian space market, both from a technology perspective, satellite perspective. On tourism, I think one of the big things that's happened, of course, I agree with everything everyone has said, is that domestic tourism has got a major boost in India currently. So I was just talking to a friend of mine who visited Goa last week, and he said he had gone to Goa 5 years earlier and how things have changed. So I think with this growth in domestic tourism, there will automatically be this catch up on the infrastructure that, as Rahul rightly mentioned, we try and catch up rather than build it earlier on. So that's happening. And the second big change that's happened is on homestays. Airbnb and even Tata's, for example, Taj has great homestay product all across India. And I think with the growth in all these options, and the more visibility all this gets in Singapore and other jurisdictions, you will see an automatic growth in tourism in India as well.
Thank you, Vivek. Amit, do you want to take a tab on the?
I'll make some small comment on the SME part. And I would say what we always do is we advise our customers, especially SME. SME by nature are not financially a very strong balance sheet, high risk, but entrepreneurial. So our advice always has been follow your large anchor customers. Imagine if you have a large anchor customer, which has maybe say 100 SME, and if the anchor customer is moving to a location, say Tamil Nadu or Karnataka in India, you follow them. That model to me has high chances of success. Because then what you're doing is you're part of their ecosystem, you're part of the supply chain, you're following them. And most, I would say, mature banks, institutions today, so give example for DBS. We have over the past 2-3 years evolved into a model called analytics-based lending, or we call sometimes big to small. So if there's a big customer, which is 100 small spokes, we're able to evaluate credit of those 100 small customers based on what they sell to large customers, based on trade flow data, not looking at individual balance sheet data. In that way, we're able to support the entire ecosystem of large anchor. And in that way, we're able to not just help that particular company, but the entire ecosystem around them. Small companies are able to get support from bank. And I know that a lot of other companies who are also doing so. So that would be my strong advice for SME, because going on a standalone, expecting that bank will support them without an anchor customer, without large balance sheet, going to be challenging.
Thank you. I think there was a question on education as well, in terms of whether, I think, and that was quite a fascinating question, I would think, because normally we would think that there is a lot that Singapore perhaps has to offer on the education side to India, right? But there was a question about whether there is something that we can bring in from India to Singapore. Vivek, would you want to take that?
Let me take a stab at it. I think it's a very interesting question because it's the other way around. You're right. Let's look at Singapore as a jurisdiction which has the largest number of IIT and IIM alumni outside India, anywhere in the world. They're all based here. Many of them may be in this room. So there is certainly a certain possibility for a deeper engagement with the Singapore universities. I think both sides can learn from each other a lot. I still feel the Singapore excellence at the higher education level, as well as more importantly at the primary education level, because we all focus on higher education to start with. India also focused on higher education from day one, right? We built the IITs and IIMs and did a great job, but we neglected the primary education system. So I think, which is now being focused on, both from the private sector as well as public sector in India. So I think at the higher education system, there is certainly a lot of cross connectivity that can take place. I think these alumni associations do that all the time, and tie-ups between, let's say, the universities here and some of these leading universities. But I think the need of the day actually in India now is at the primary and secondary schooling stage, where I don't know what role Singapore can play, but it has a fantastic public schooling system. And therefore, I think, it has to be, both sides working together. But to your question, I think there has to be a, deeper connection between the universities here and in India.
Thank you, Vivek. Neil, do you have anything at this point to add, or shall we go for a second round of questions now?
Thanks, Dr. Sharma. I think I agree with what my fellow panelists have said on many issues. Couple of things to add. On the SME side, so Jaiswal raised a very good question. And our experience at the Indian Chamber and otherwise has been that it's always a struggle for SMEs to go anywhere, not just India. It's in ASEAN, and specifically when you're looking at even relatively closer countries like Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia. Now, our view has always been get the right partner early, because without a partner, then you're flying blind and you don't have the resources that a large cap company does. Now, finding the right partner is hard. And as Vivek may testify, he spends as much time in corporate marriages as his corporate divorces. So it's very important to get the right partner upfront and then also have an exit mechanism that put in place early so that down the road, if there needs to be a separation, the rules of the game of the separation are set up. So having said all that, I think unless you can sell in the domestic market of the respective country, in this case, we're talking about India, you should not venture into that country. And there are a select number of products and services in Singapore that have a demand in India where there is already not very deeply entrenched competition. So it's important to be aware of who you are and what the receptivity of your products and services are in that country. Is there really a gap that you're trying to fill? If there's no gap, then don't go. The second thing on tourism, I think it's a very good question. To me, it's a question of infrastructure around tourism. I have many friends in Singapore and around the world who say they need to take a vacation after they come back from a vacation in India. Now, that's not a good sign where, it's a stressful vacation. The whole idea of taking time off, and especially in our very busy lives, that time off is so valuable that you want to optimize that time. And we were talking about earlier, he spoke about the last mile. And I think in India, the issue is that last mile. I think the connectivity has become a lot better to the respective cities that you're trying to get to. But to get to your destination, assuming you're not going to stay in the city all the time, from the city, to get to your destination from the city sometimes takes a day. If you're going to take a week off, you're taking a day to get there and a day to come back. That shortens the vacation by, 2 divided by 7%. So that's a significant percentage. I think that has to be shortened. That has to be quickened. One of the things maybe, with the expansion of airports, there may be more flights to third-tier cities, if I may call them that. And specialized focus on creating infrastructure to enhance the tourism potential that is there in the country. I mean, a friend of mine, all his jokes, he says, if Prime Minister Modi ever calls him and offers him to be a minister, which ministry would he take? He'd want to be the Minister of Tourism. And for the simple reason that the potential is fantastic. At the same time, the hurdles are things that are man-made. They can be addressed, but they need to be addressed relatively quickly because, as our own Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, said very recently to the Singapore Tourism Board, is the countries around us are getting so much more competitive when it comes to tourism. And I think that's absolutely applies to India, where people are often bypassing India because they want to take a vacation after a vacation.
Thank you, Neil. Now we'll go for the second round of questions. We still have some time. I think you have a question, Ravi. Is there a mic over there?
Sorry, I want to go back to a point on tourism. My name is Ravi Veloor. I work for the Straits Times. I'm also an honorary fellow with ISAS. One of the things you need to realize about tourism into India is that it's also important to count average days spent in a country. So you can't easily compare Singapore to India that way because, the typical traveler to India might spend between 11 to 14 days, and here we have 2.3 days. So, but your point is well taken. Given India's size, it really needs a much, much more. And it's also a huge opportunity for employment creation in the country. And so much of the money that's being spent on other areas, I don't want to diss the Singapore appetite for helping out with the semiconductor ecosystem, but Jay, you might remember, or maybe you may not, that nearly 30 years ago, Singapore actually crafted a detailed project report to build up Indian tourism infrastructure. But India was a little suspicious at that point because the document stressed the importance of opening up connectivity. And, India thought it was a ruse by Singapore to get more flights into SIA flights into India. But one of the things this country needs to be careful about is that, as you said, or maybe as Neil said, there are many suitors for that market today. This month, AirAsia is going to fly to Port Blair. When that happens, and it's the first time the Andamans and Nicobars are being directly linked to international flights. And that's a part of India that lies in Southeast Asia. The Andaman and Nicobars make India a Southeast Asian country as much as it is a South Asian country. We have to realize that. When AirAsia starts those flights into Port Blair, Kuala Lumpur overtakes Singapore in the number of points of connectivity into India. I think it's a sad miss on our part that we did not think about it. Today, passengers from Cochin in Kerala are directly linked to Ho Chi Minh City. There are Vietjet is flying there. And who's traveling on those flights? The people transiting to Bali. This is traffic that should have come to us. There's no reason why traffic should move north to go south. But these are things that we need to watch out for. I just leave you with those thoughts.
Since I have the microphone, I just wanted to add to what Vivek was saying about the collaboration in Singapore and India on education. Actually, NIE, which is part of NTU, trains hundreds of teachers from Delhi every year. That has been ongoing on that front, on the primary education. On the higher education, NTU, where I work, we have something called India Connect, where we have been taking students from top universities in India, IITs, IIMs, the ones you named, AIMS and others, and training them here for the higher research kind of thing that they can do here. Just wanted to add that point.
Hi, Arvind
Please,
Jairam.
please, we have got questions over here. I'll come back to you.
Hello, I'm Abhijit Beura. I'm co-founder and managing director of an AI-based ad tech firm called TrueAd. I spent about 2 decades in corporate and ventured into the AI-based ad tech on my own. My question was specific to the digital revolution. We spoke about many sectors, and thanks to the panel sharing many insights as well as challenges, right? So whether it's manufacturing, whether it is talking about food security, food sector, as a result of digital revolution and AI, which has come into mix, including semiconductors, which Amit spoke about, how do we see Singapore and India to leverage each other's strength? Because for something like AI, you need data centers, you need infrastructures, which is critical. Singapore is positioning itself as AI hub for Southeast Asia. That's what the government's direction is. And India is positioning itself between Middle East and Southeast Asia. So my question is specific to AI policy. Is there a roadmap where India and Singapore can collaborate together? A. B, also on the telecom infrastructure side, which is also critical for this. If anyone in the panel can take this question.
Thank you. Please.
This is Lakshmi Narayan, actually. I have an IT services company here, but of course, my questions are not related to IT. I just wanted to check up with Mr. Amit regarding the DBS penetration and all that. I just wanted to check how is LVB doing and how much is the percentage of Lakshmi Vilas Bank in the DBS financials as such, just to get an idea. And regarding the Temasek investments, which there was an announcement a couple of months ago that certain areas like fintech, health, and all being added to the Temasek portfolio. And for example, in Manipal hospitals and all that. Do they have anything to do in the so-called semicon side also, keeping in mind today the Prime Minister Modi is visiting AEM in Singapore. And to Mr. Neil, I have a small suggestion. See, we're just talking in the floor just now about the tourism, right? As we all know, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, other countries, just to attract Indian tourists, they made, visa on arrival. Now, I'm not expecting Singapore to give visa on arrival to Indians, but the vice versa can be done. India can give visa-free entry to Singapore. Why not? That can be pushed, and it helps both trade, connectivity, and tourism. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, I'm Arvind Jairam from the Straits Times. Thank you for this discussion. I noticed that the panel members said that states are often are responsible for companies coming to India, and they manage a lot of the sort of investments that come in directly. What could you give your views on what happened with in the case of Amravati, the city where Singapore was involved, and suddenly the project, the plug was pulled on the project. So can the panel shed some light on how do Singaporean companies mitigate that kind of risk where policy continuity cannot be guaranteed in India? Thank you.
Thank you. I can take one or two questions from this side if there are any, to be fair on both the sides. If not, then let's go over there. Yes, let's take this question and then we'll go to the panel.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, well, okay, I'll come back.
My name is Shubhang Shudat. I'm running a shipping company. So mine is just a comment really that we speak about challenges. I think it's best to then take the bull by the horns and talk about live experiences, I can name a few. I think Singtel, Airtel is facing a huge tax bill. I think Vodafone is facing a retrospective tax bill, which goes back 7 or 8 years. PSA, Port of Singapore Authorities, having a major problem in its facility at Tuticorin. Probably Singapore Airlines also had some very difficult early years when they partnered with Tata. So maybe somebody could put all these points together and give it to prospective companies which are planning to enter India. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take a last question for this round.
Thank you. This is Duria Aziz. I'm SVP for Scholastic, which is a publishing company. Some of you might know it as the publishers of Harry Potter. I head up education for international, so all of the markets outside of Singapore. So thank you, Vivek, for your comments on education. I think that could possibly be the topic for your next Singapore-India forum, really. It's a matter close to my heart, obviously. But I want to start by giving a shout out to Enterprise Singapore. Jaya himself has been part of the team personally responsible for bringing the Singapore brand of education international. We literally created the Singapore Math brand, brought it to the US and many other parts of the world. So that is one great opportunity that Singapore companies have, the fact that you have Enterprise Singapore that will support you all the way, right from a very high policy industry level thinking all the way to organizing meetings and events. So that's something that I wanted to say. There was a lot of discussion about SMEs and particularly about doing business in India. And to me, to add to the point that was just made, I think the hidden costs actually take SMEs by surprise. So the cost of doing business, of even registering a company, the taxation involved, the government, all of that is something that that businesses need to take into consideration and get a factor into their ROI, right? So that's something. Also, import taxes in India are very high. And again, policies can change. So suddenly things that were not taxed can become taxable. They can get, goods can get reclassified and attract a higher tax, and that there goes your whole value proposition. So that's the other point. And then finally, you know, to talk about really the elephant in the room, it's the addressable market. You know, you think about, wow, there is this huge, big market. But then when you think, and particularly for Singapore companies, when we think about our corporate governance, then that, you know, your addressable market starts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So that's something that we need to, you know, have an answer to. How do you deal with corporate governance on the one hand and corruption on the other? So thank you so much for taking this question.
We will perhaps take these questions for now because we are also running quite out of time. We might run out of time. If we have time, we'll come back again. Amit, I think there were two questions addressed to you.
I'll first start with LVB question. And I would say that, look, we do not publish the details of individual breakdown. Having said that, the integration of LVB with TDS India has gone really well. It's now operated as a one branch. And we have, in fact, something called some gentleman who basically runs the entire operation of combined LVB TPS together. So as a single brand, single customer base, single tech platform, that's fully integrated. So we don't separate, report individual businesses. An idea is to run as a single country. And that integration, and as a result of that, India as a geography has done very well. I mean, just for everybody's benefit, India is one of the core markets for DBS. We identified 6 core markets, India is one of them. DBS is the first foreign bank to locally incorporate in India in 2021. And LVP really has helped us to expand the network. So coming to the question on Gen AI, so I would say Singapore has really taken leadership in terms of drafting code of conduct, ethics, rules of engagement for Gen AI. I would say Singapore is leader in that. Also, Singapore being a small country is a very good sandbox for running application on Gen AI. Now, India has a large population. So my sense is areas of opportunity of partnership which could work together could be, number one, the application of Gen AI ethics, rules of engagement could be shared and see is there common grounds for Singapore, India to work together. Similarly, on the application side, this is a good market test bed for running those applications and then go and commercialize in a bigger market. A great partnership between Singapore and India could also help it. The last question about digital infrastructure. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, because of data sovereignty, you are required to build local data centers. And that will not go away. It's actually going to go other way around. Every country is asking providers to store data in that geography because of data sovereignty, transfer of data in terms of confidentiality. That's going to continue. But the reality is once you build application, especially for Gen AI, that you can basically have a large learning model being run in one location, inferences run different location. That model could work. And that's where you could partner up. So I'll keep it short in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Rahul, would you want to take some of the questions?
Yeah.
Maybe
thanks.
one or two?
Yeah. On the data center piece, I'll just weigh in on Gen AI. I think edge data centers is something that will see a big rollout in India with 5G being now available everywhere. So I think that is an area where a very local version of Gen AI would actually speed up response times for users as well as be very easy for the rest of the network to handle, given the heavy consumption it does on bandwidth and data. There was a question on telecom infra and whether we could do more together as countries. India, like many other countries, has built its entire telecom infrastructure using equipment from Huawei, ZTE, Ericsson, Nokia, now, and Samsung for parts of it. Out of this ecosystem, Huawei and ZTE are not now a part of India's rollout anymore. There are concerns with India and with some other countries about the security around use of these equipment. That leaves you with a duopoly of Ericsson and Nokia, which leads to pricing challenges and with the openness of the compatibility of the networks and the equipment. India now has its own 4G and 5G stack, which is developed by Tejas Networks and TCS, both Tata companies, which is rolled out in India. Very proven, very reliable, and rolled out in other parts of Africa as well. There is an opportunity with Singtel's investment in Bharti to see if, not just for Singapore's future needs, but wherever Singtel is also invested in other geographies, whether this stack would also fulfill the requirements for affordable 4G, 5G stacks. If nothing else, it's an option to help you negotiate with the Ericssons and the Nokias of the world. It definitely would be more cost effective.
Thank you, Rahul. Jay? Yeah, let me take a couple. There was a question, I think, on visa arrangements between India and Singapore. This issue does come up from time to time, and it's being regularly reviewed. Certainly on the part of the authorities here in Singapore, they've expanded the network of visa agents across India into second-tier cities also, so that the visa application system, visa application process for Indians hoping to visit Singapore is smoothened. Question, Amaravati, I suppose I try and answer that. I think it can, in any democracy, India is just one of them. If you're doing business in a democracy and your counterpart is a state authority, government authority, then you have to bear that possibility in mind. For the SMEs, often their counterparts are a fellow business entity, private sector entity. And so this would, it should insulate them from this kind of change. But this is one of the risks of doing business, certainly with state entities.
And look, I think this is not unique to India, right? You've heard now yesterday the US saying that they're not going to allow a takeover of US Steel by Nippon Steel. So all that hard work. So we tend to make, I'm not saying the problems don't exist. All I'm saying is the same problems exist everywhere. In India, we have a habit of exaggerating those problems more. For example, the Vodafone one that you talked about, that was a big issue. It was I can use the word, a stupid thing that the legislation did, but eventually it was rolled back. It's not an issue anymore. And Vodafone is back up and running. So these things happen. It's you need to build in, I would say, a bit of a risk premium. One of my clients was telling me the other day that because of some of these uncertainties and some of the challenges we spoke about, tax, etc. And mind you, if you look at the US tax code, it's 100 times more complicated. But you won't hear about it in the news so much. But there are bigger problems in other countries as well. So build in a little bit of risk premium. And the most important advice I'll give you is hire the right lawyers. So I'll give it to Neil now. He suggested me to say that.
Thanks, Vivek. You paid for your lunch. I want to speak about the question on education, because I think that's a very pertinent thing. Now, as chairman of ISAS knows, as a chancellor of a university, we got some fantastic universities here. Our schooling system is of top quality. But my view is, at the school level, it is hard to transform or take a system into another country. And that was a question earlier too from Rahul, I think. If you may recollect, many years ago, I do because I'm old enough, the US at one time wanted to do everything that was going on in Japan, wanted to replicate Japan 30 years ago because they thought Japan was going to rule the world. But if you look at the Japanese education system, which has some very unique elements, to try and put that into the American culture is next to impossible. So I'm not a big fan of trying to transport education systems from one country to another. However, when it comes to universities, whether it's NUS, SUSS, NTU, SMU, the question is, why aren't we in India in a more significant way? Some of the Indian business schools are in Singapore, SP Jain, Amity, I think some people from these schools are here. So there needs to be more of that happening. Having said that, it goes back to my earlier point. You got to identify a gap. What are you really trying to accomplish in India by going, if you're, say, NTU or NUS or what have you? Where is the gap? Who's your partner? Who are going to be your students? Because you're really going in for the domestic market. Personally, I've been surprised these universities haven't gone into India already, but that's from my vantage point, and I'm sure they've got their strategic reasons for doing so, while the Americans have, and some of the UK schools have. While personally, in my view, the education offered here in many cases is far superior. Not trying to be nice to you, Jim. The second thing on the visa question that you mentioned, I think I think the gentleman was talking about the other way around. Yeah. Now, as all of us know, visa decisions are made on a bilateral basis. So I don't see the Indian government, in my view, opening up the doors and saying visa-free entry for foreign nationals if there is no reciprocity on the other side. That's the nature of the beast. That's the way it is. And I think we need to be aware of the considerations involved there. You may also be aware of how fees are directly tied in. If a country increases the fee for a certain visa, the other side also increases the fee, which can mean a lot of rupees on the other side. So that's reality. I don't disagree with your idea. I think it could be a good idea, but there has to be perhaps a very focused short list, and Singapore should be on that list.
What I'm trying to say is India can, open up and give, because Singapore is a small nation, what they are giving is for Singaporeans, right? So when countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia can give, visa-free entry, what I mean to say is, on-arrival visas to Indians, India can do the other way around. That's what I mean to say. Because we're talking about, we're in Singapore-India Forum. I'm talking about India opening up to Singapore, extending a hand, and it's not just only for tourists, it's for businessmen, it's for all. It's connectivity. See, when you really want to give free entry to somebody, you select a nation which has got 10 million population or 100 million population. Obviously, it is 10 million population.
We have to cut this short because we're running out of time now. Perhaps we got the question quite well, and but this can be discussed further. Definitely, visa thing is a reciprocal thing. So I think the negotiations and all that will determine whether this can go forward. So perhaps you want to
just
briefly?
I think it's harder to have that happen in this age of greater geopolitical tensions. However, your idea is a good one.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have run out of time, so we have to close this session. I think it was really fantastic. Got to learn a lot from our eminent speakers here. Let's give a big round of applause to our speakers. And I hand this over to Divya.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma and the panelists for the candid and insightful session. So for the audience, for the active participation, please join me in extending a warm appreciation to our chairperson and the panelists. With this, we have come to the end of the first panel discussion for the day. The second panel discussion on the next phase of collaboration will commence after lunch. Please be back in the ballroom and be seated by 5 p.m. for this session. We invite you now to join us for lunch at the foyer. Thank you.